The Spider. On Earth 15, Peter Parker gained his powers after being bitten by a radioactive spider and, at some point, bonded with an alien symbiote. However, this version of Peter Parker was a sociopath who took pleasure in hurting others. This would lead to a crime spree severe enough that a jury sentenced him to 67 consecutive life sentences. Very little is known about Peter's life before he bonded with the symbiote, leaving it unclear whether he was ever a hero or simply a killer the creature made worse. He was one of many heroes recruited by the Timebreakers, a group of beings who oversaw the repair of the multiverse, in order to join Weapon X, a team that would travel between realities to fix ones that had become broken or damaged. Going by the name Spider, he was eventually killed when the Timebreakers decided to eliminate the surplus members of Weapon X and its companion team, the Exiles. Long afterward, his body was returned to his home reality and buried in a prison cemetery. Wolf Spider. On Earth 16-827, Peter Parker became a villain called the Wolf Spider. Little is known about his origins, though he likely came to his powers the same way most versions of Peter Parker do. However, rather than acting out of responsibility, he instead killed without remorse, targeting anyone who stood for heroism, and used those powers towards exclusively selfish ends. By his own claim, he murdered every hero in his world, including his reality's Miles Morales. To get what he wants, he frequently pretends to ally himself with other villains who possess shards of the Siege Perilous, a mystical object whose fragments he covets, only to betray them once they've served their purposes. He regards heroism and responsibility as pathetic ideals and will destroy anyone who lives by them, including his own multiversal counterparts. And while he hates every version of himself, he reserves a special loathing for the Ultimate Spider-Man, openly resenting him for being the center of the multiverse. Wolf Spider's quest began when a shard of the Siege Perilous fell into his world. Using it, he discovered the existence of other universes. He set out to conquer these other universes and wipe out every good counterpart of his he could find. The shard let him travel to the Vampire Universe, where he faked an alliance with the Lizard King. He fought Blood Spider, Spider-Man, and Kid Arachnid, and managed to steal that universe's shard. Once the Lizard King was defeated and order was restored, Wolf Spider revealed his true identity and his plan to the heroes. He tried to take their shards as well, but failed before escaping to another dimension. He eventually resurfaced in Kid Arachnid's universe, at the New York Police Department, where Spider-Man and Kid Arachnid had already recovered another shard. Wolf Spider took Miles Morales' mother hostage and demanded the shard in exchange for her safety. The heroes were able to free her with the help of Gwen Stacy, but Wolf Spider still managed to eventually get the piece of the shard, which was the last piece he needed to complete the Siege Perilous. With the completed artifact in hand, he set out to conquer the multiverse, leaving ruin in his wake until the multiversal heroes tracked him down. Wolf Spider then began draining the life force of every Spider-Man across the multiverse, overpowering even Gwen and Kid Arachnid. Convinced he could become the one true Peter Parker and the center of the multiverse, he tried to absorb Ultimate Spider-Man's life force as well. However, because he was an evil Peter Parker, the heroic life forces he had stolen poisoned him from the inside, shattering his body across dimensions and killing him. Zombie Spider-Man. On Earth 2149, Spider-Man came across the Avengers facing off against an alternate reality Ash Williams. Colonel America, Earth 2149's version of Captain America, ordered Spider-Man to web Ash up and haul him away. As he did, Ash explained that he'd been hurled into this reality by a zombified sentry. This diseased sentry appeared and passed its zombie plague to several Avengers, and an infected Colonel America bit Spider-Man. Spider-Man faked being infected long enough to pull Ash away from the now undead heroes, but once he revealed he was still human, he abandoned Ash to rush home and protect his loved ones. However, the infection caught up with him first, and despite trying to warn them, he turned and then ate Mary Jane and his Aunt May before becoming a full-blown zombie. Killing his family haunted Peter for the rest of his existence as one of the living dead. For a time, only feeding clouded his mind, but when his sanity returned following each meal, he was overwhelmed by guilt and remorse. This was at its starkest after he tore into Magneto during a feeding frenzy, as, upon coming back to himself, he was so disgusted that he wished he were dead. Peter's self-loathing became so persistent that it irritated the other zombies, who chose to embrace the hunger rather than fight it. Despite this, the hunger still exposed an uglier side of Peter, as at one point he admitted to how much he enjoyed devouring J. Jonah Jameson. Though he no longer had any reason to protect a secret identity, Peter continued wearing his mask, and when Luke Cage asked him why, Spider-Man admitted that the shame of killing May and Mary Jane was so crushing that he couldn't stand to see his own face. Poison Peter Parker. On Earth 7134, Spider-Man shared the same backstory as the mainline Peter Parker up until his second clash with Morlun, an energy vampire who preys on spider-powered beings. Left cocooned beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, Spider-Man was offered a chance at rebirth by the living embodiment of his spider powers, but he furiously refused and killed it by tearing off its head, leaving his transformation and resurrection unfinished. Sensing this, the Venom symbiote abandoned its host, Mac Gargan, and sought out Peter in his cocoon. Peter's mind resisted for months, but the symbiote eventually crushed what was left of his psyche and consumed him, filling the void created by his incomplete rebirth. Uatu the Watcher himself stated that nothing of Peter's personality survived this transformation. The resulting creature, born of the mutation, broke into Stark Tower and confronted Peter's Aunt May and his wife Mary Jane. It viewed its own existence as an act of love and a miracle beyond anything anyone could pray for, and intended to share this gift by bonding Mary Jane to a new symbiote offspring. When Mary Jane called it Venom, it dismissed Venom as a failure who never reached his potential and instead called itself Poison. Following confrontations with Wolverine and Luke Cage, Poison again offered Mary Jane its power, but she refused. Poison replied that it could simply reanimate her corpse with a symbiote so she'd be a mindless version of herself, free of her pesky feminine impulses. To spare Luke Cage and Wolverine, Mary Jane agreed to be bonded, vowing to make Poison's life miserable, and this caused Poison to second-guess transforming Mary Jane, and thus he left. Poison instead dug up the body of Gwen Stacy and revived her with a symbiote, transforming her into a creature resembling Carnage. Spider's Shadow. On Earth 21619, Peter Parker's life unfolded similar to the mainline Spider-Man until he bonded with the Venom symbiote. Tormented by recurring nightmares about his failures and convinced his life had fallen apart, Peter grew angrier and more violent as a crime fighter, with his behavior ever more shaped by the symbiote. Eventually, Peter went to the Baxter Building, where Fantastic Four members Mr. Fantastic and the Human Torch were disturbed by how much his personality had changed. Worn out, Peter asked to rest while Mr. Fantastic's equipment studied the black suit. In his sleep, he dreamed of the symbiote, urging him to accept that he couldn't protect his loved ones without harming anyone who stood in his way. Mr. Fantastic soon woke Peter and revealed that the black suit was an alien symbiote trying to merge with him both mentally and physically. Peter, however, brushed aside the warning that it could be dangerous and embraced the bond, angrily rejecting Mr. Fantastic's wish to lock the creature away and experiment on it. Hoping to reconcile with his Aunt May, from whom he'd become estranged after dropping out of college, Peter visited her house, not realizing the Hobgoblin had trailed him there. Now knowing Spider-Man's real identity, the villain attacked and set the house ablaze with May trapped inside. Because the symbiote is terrified of fire, Peter couldn't bring himself to go in and save her, and so she died. Channeling his grief and fury at the Hobgoblin, Peter twisted into a monstrous form and killed the Hobgoblin by crushing his skull, swearing to use his power to destroy his enemies before they could take anyone else he loved. Surrendering to the suit's corrupting influence, he began killing criminals outright. He also confronted J. Jonah Jameson, crushing one of his hands as a warning to stop his written attacks against Spider-Man. Worried that he might be targeted next, the Kingpin hired the villains Shocker and Scorpion to take Spider-Man down. Peter killed both of them instead and then came for the Kingpin himself. The crime boss admitted he had uncovered Peter's identity, intending to threaten a family member or partner as leverage, and said he pitied Peter for having no loved ones left just before Peter brutally killed him. Spider-Man's killing spree pushed several of his enemies to unite as the Sinister Six. They found a surprising helper in J. Jonah Jameson, who now saw Spider-Man as more dangerous than the criminals. The group baited him into a remote area using the villain Beetle, but Peter picked them off one by one, killing Mysterio, Rhino, and Electro. Jameson then attacked him by controlling a Spider Slayer, a robot built to hunt Spider-Man. About to kill Peter in a burning barn, Jameson was talked out of it when Peter explained that the suit had been controlling him and revealed he was Peter Parker. An explosion set off by another villain, Kraven the Hunter, caused the symbiote to separate from Peter, and Jameson helped him escape back to his apartment. Upon returning, police surrounded Peter's apartment since the Kingpin had exposed Peter as Spider-Man before dying, so Peter and his friends fled to the roof ahead of the police. He sent Black Cat to take Jameson home and then intended to take Mary Jane home, but along the way the two of them saw the symbiote take over the Fantastic Four's headquarters, swallowing the building in a mass of living alien tissue. At the building, the Avengers, the Mutant Team X-Factor, and part of the Fantastic Four were sizing up the crisis. Peter persuaded Captain America to let him go in and stop the symbiote, but Mary Jane went in after him with the Human Torch following Watson. Eventually, following the symbiote gaining control over a number of heroes, including the Thing and Reed Richards, Peter had the Torch lure the main symbiote, presently bonded to Richards, using a device that projected a fake appearance to impersonate Spider-Man and trick it into freeing Reed, though the symbiote killed Reed in the process. The Torch then destroyed the symbiote with his flames, releasing everyone controlled by its offspring. Peter then surrendered himself to be put on trial for the murders he'd committed. At the trial, other heroes testified that they too had been unable to resist the symbiotes controlling them, and as a result, he was found not guilty and was eventually invited by the Invisible Woman to join the Fantastic Four. The Punishing Spider. On Earth 71938, after his Uncle Ben was murdered by a burglar, Peter chose to kill the murderer himself rather than hand him over to the police. That decision set the tone for everything that followed. As Spider-Man, he resolved to fight crime by whatever means he deemed necessary. He even held on to the gun that had killed his uncle, both as a weapon of his own and as a constant reminder of what crime had cost him. Also of note is that the radioactive spider that gave Peter his powers bore a distinctive skull-like marking, and Peter modeled his costume after it, incorporating that same skull design into his suit. At first, Peter tried to hold back, sparing his enemies' lives when he could, but when he realized that certain villains would simply return again and again, he decided the only solution was to kill them for good. This came to a head when the Sinister Six, a team of his deadliest foes, kidnapped his Aunt May and Betty Brant. Seeing no other way out, Spider-Man killed the entire group, using weapons he had built specifically to take them all down. Soon after, Peter enrolled at Empire State University, where he met and fell in love with Gwen Stacy. Around this time, a violent turf war broke out between rival mob factions, and the Kingpin came close to seizing control of the entire city before Spider-Man killed him. Since the factions had mostly wiped each other out, Spider-Man left them to finish each other off. Then the Green Goblin kidnapped Gwen. Spider-Man killed him using ammunition built to breach the Goblin's armor, then barely managed to save Gwen's life. In the aftermath, Peter told Gwen who he really was, proposed to her, and chose to walk away from the vigilante lifestyle, throwing out his costume to pursue a quiet future with her. Back in Black. On Earth 9213, Peter Parker's life mirrored that of the mainline Spider-Man right up through the fallout of the superhero Civil War, the conflict that forced superheroes to publicly register their identities. During the conflict, Peter had unmasked himself before turncoating and becoming a wanted fugitive, and as a result had gone into hiding with his Aunt May and his wife Mary Jane. However, now knowing Peter's identity, the Kingpin sent a hired killer after him. Peter's spider sense alerted him to the attack and he managed to push Aunt May to safety, but the bullet meant for him struck Mary Jane instead, killing her. Consumed by grief and fury, Peter tracked down the assassin, grabbed him by the throat, and forced him to name his employer. When the man admitted the Kingpin had sent him, Peter shot him dead. Peter confessed what he had done to a horrified Aunt May, then put on a black suit. The Kingpin, meanwhile, warned federal authorities that his life was supposedly in danger, and because he was too valuable as an informant to lose, they arranged protection for him by recruiting Iron Man to capture the unregistered Spider-Man. Stark cornered Peter at Rikers, the prison holding the Kingpin, but Peter overpowered him in a brutal fight, even managing to rip Tony's armor apart. After Spider-Man tracked down the Kingpin had two officers hold Aunt May at gunpoint, warning Peter that any resistance or escape attempt would mean her death, all so that the Kingpin could beat Peter to death himself. Certain that Spider-Man's refusal to kill was a line he would never cross, Fisk shed his prison jacket and squared off against him. However, Peter killed the Kingpin. As a result of witnessing Peter murder Kingpin, May disowned him, and Peter then gave himself up to Iron Man and the authorities, hoping that a jury might understand why he had chosen the path that he did. Last Stand Spider-Man. On Earth 31-2500, Peter Parker shared the same history as his mainline counterpart up until at least the Grim Hunt, a storyline in which the villain Kraven the Hunter is brought back from the dead. In this timeline, Peter killed Kraven shortly after his resurrection, and making that choice sent his life down a much darker path, turning him both colder and more lethal, leading to his eventual expulsion from the Avengers. Embracing his new mindset, Peter took on a new attitude and costume as an anti-hero and began killing his enemies, including killing Dr. Octopus by driving one of his own tentacles through his heart. Years later, Peter found himself on the run from the police. He visited Aunt May's grave, and when the police confronted him, they offered him the chance to surrender and confess to his crimes, but he refused. He fought them and was ultimately shot down and killed. Spider Shot. On Earth 8351, Spider-Man and Wolverine teamed up for a covert mission set in motion by a woman named Charlemagne. The partnership turned deadly when the two heroes came to blows, and in the chaos, Spider-Man accidentally killed Charlemagne, who died in Wolverine's arms. The two patched things up later on, and Wolverine offered him a job, seeing it as a chance for Spider-Man to make up for what had happened. Their next assignment took them to the mountains of Russia to retrieve a woman named Alex. Along the way, they were ambushed by a mutant who could control the weather and by the Crimson Dynamo. Wolverine subdued the weather-controlling mutant, while Spider-Man struck the Crimson Dynamo's jaw so hard that it snapped his neck and killed him. After saving Alex, Spider-Man decided to stay with Wolverine, training to sharpen his skills while also building himself a new suit and weapons. He also ended his relationship with Mary Jane Watson and became involved with Alex, who bore a strong resemblance to Gwen Stacy. As Wolverine and Spider-Man continued taking on missions, Peter rose to become one of the world's best assassins and would eventually participate in various multiversal adventures alongside several other Spider-Men. Pestilence Spider-Man. On Earth 5701, when the Conqueror Apocalypse set out to dominate the world, he captured 4 people he considered worthy and corrupted them into his servants, known as his Horsemen. One of them was Spider-Man, transformed into the Horseman called Pestilence, changing him into a creature with 4 arms and 4 legs. 3 of these horsemen, Pestilence, Famine, and Death, crossed paths with Deadpool and his allies, who had come to this alternate reality while searching for their own world's version of Cable. The 2 sides fought, and the horsemen were ultimately defeated. Ghost Spider. On Earth 11638, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben was never killed, and was thus able to help Peter learn to use his spider powers. Peter grew into the Amazing Spider, a beloved and famous superhero who was also a wealthy, successful scientist who ran his own company, Parker Technologies. Determined to become the strongest hero possible, he built a machine to capture alternate versions of himself from other realities and drain their life force into his own body to increase his strength and abilities. He killed countless other Spider-Men this way, growing so powerful that he was able to defeat Thanos and even Galactus, but the life draining became an addiction in and of itself, one he couldn't break free from. This Peter eventually kidnapped the Spider-Man of Earth 616, tricking him into believing he had ended up on Earth 11638 by accident. and Spider-Man came to realize that this universe was something of a perfect version of his own. After visiting Parker Technologies, he discovered that the Amazing Spider already knew who he was, and that this universe's Ben Parker was still alive. Spider-Man decided to visit Ben, and the two talked about the differences between their realities and their lives, but over the course of the conversation, Ben handed Peter a tea laced with a sedative. Peter woke up in the Amazing Spider's lair, named the Web, hooked up to a machine designed to drain his powers and transfer them to the Amazing Spider. However, Spider-Man escaped, and over the course of a fight between the two, the Amazing Spider was convinced that what he had done was not truly heroic. When Ben was about to connect a distracted Spider-Man to the machine, the Amazing Spider stepped in the way and let the machine absorb his own powers instead, seemingly killing him. It was later revealed that he had been put in a coma, while his spirit was trapped in hell. When his universe's Dr. Bruce Banner, who served as the Sorcerer Supreme, died fighting his own evil alter ego, the Infernal Hulk, he survived in an astral form. He freed Parker and infused him with the spirits and powers of the repentant damned, giving him a second chance at life. Parker woke from his coma to discover he had become the Ghost Spider. He then returned to Parker Technologies and finished building an interdimensional translocator to send the Spider-Man of Earth 616 back to his own universe. Spider-Man. On Earth 11580, Peter Parker was a gifted young student who, together with his best friend Gwen Stacy, was invited by scientist Max Modell to tour his cutting-edge company, Horizon Labs. During the visit, the two watched one of Modell's experiments, where a colony of spiders was blasted with radioactive particles in an attempt to alter their genetics. Peter Parker fell into the colony and appeared to be eaten alive, but as it happened, the spiders merged into a single hive mind being that absorbed his consciousness. Posing as the man it had consumed, this collective called itself Spider-Man, donned a costume, and took up fighting crime. Eventually, a villain known as the Goblin Queen and her servants began bombing and abducting people at random. When Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin attempted to abduct Gwen, Spider-Man arrived just in time to stop him. As Spider-Man faced down a trio of goblins, a villain named Jack-o'-lantern struck him from behind, slashing open the back of his costume. Instead of finding a man, Jack-o'-lantern was met by a swarm of spiders, which overwhelmed him, crawled up his mask, and tore off his head, horrifying the other villains and sending them fleeing. Gwen Stacy witnessed all of this, but was still convinced that Peter could be rescued. She tried to persuade him that the research done at Horizon Labs might still turn him back into the person he once was, but Spider-Man rejected her, warning her that he could never be anything but a monster, and that she needed to stay away. He then vanished into a nearby alley, leaving behind only his empty costume. Ruins Peter Parker. On Earth 9591, to pay his way through college, Peter Parker took a job at the Daily Bugle. One day, while experimenting on a radioactive spider, he was bitten by it, but rather than gaining superpowers and becoming the hero Spider-Man, the bite triggered a mutant virus in his body, turning him into a disease carrier. Shortly before the first signs of his infection appeared as a contagious rash, Peter made one last visit to the Daily Bugle, where he unknowingly passed the virus to reporter Philip Sheldon. This exposure killed Sheldon as a result of giving him cancer. Peter himself was later placed in quarantine as the rash spread to cover his entire body. Spider-Man Reign. On Earth 7237, Peter Parker, once the hero Spider-Man, was an elderly man who had given up crime fighting and worked in a flower shop. His wife, Mary Jane Watson, had died of cancer caused by years of radioactive exposure to Peter. New York City was now a safe but oppressive police state ruled entirely by Mayor Waters and his advisor Edward Sachs. Both heroes and villains had been banned as super terrorists, and order was kept by a harsh police force known as the Reign. One day, Peter was fired from the flower shop after sending the wrong flowers and ruining a couple's wedding. After witnessing Reign agents arrest a local youth, getting beaten in an attempt to prevent them, and being blamed for the arrest by a nearby girl who had escaped Reign custody, Peter arrived back home. While there, Peter found himself tormented by memories and hallucinations of Mary Jane. At the same time, Mayor Waters unveiled the web system run from his tower, which would seal off the city behind an energy barrier, so no one could come or go without government permission. That night, Peter was awoken by knocking and answered the door in his underwear to find J. Jonah Jameson, his old boss, who was holding a package. But Peter said nothing and shut the door. Frustrated, Jameson started vandalizing a car on the street, leading to a scuffle with 2 Reign officers. Back inside, Peter opened the package and found a camera and his old black suit mask. Wearing only the mask and his underwear, he intervened and defeated the officers, picturing himself young and in his prime again. However, when Jameson asked if Spider-Man was truly back, Peter punched him and walked off. The next morning, Peter regretted it all and begged his hallucination of Mary Jane to pack so they could flee the city before the web barrier sealed it shut, but she just stared silently out the window. Meanwhile, Jameson took to the streets declaring Spider-Man's return, drawing a crowd of young supporters, while the Reign-controlled Daily Bugle News Network painted Spider-Man as a dangerous lunatic. Alarmed by Spider-Man's reappearance, Mayor Waters and Sachs released 6 of Spider-Man's old enemies from prison. Sachs also pushed Webb to activate that very night. He explained that this newly named Sinner 6 had been promised freedom from both prison and New York if they killed their old foe, after which Webb would keep them permanently locked out. When Waters questioned whether they could be trusted, Sachs revealed that each villain had remote detonation explosives implanted inside them in case they turned on Reign. Back in the city, the girl who had originally accused Peter was led by a boy named Casey to a rundown church where a large group of kids were gathered to hear Jameson's speech. At Jameson's request, Casey hacked every screen and device in the city to broadcast Jameson's speech, along with Spider-Man's home address. A crowd soon gathered outside Peter's apartment. Among them was an elderly hypno-hustler, a former villain who used music to control people, coming out of retirement to help his old enemy. He used his boombox to force the Reign agents in the crowd to dance, but the aging device ran out of battery, and the agents killed him. Inside, Mary Jane was staring out the window once again, which finally drew Peter to look outside. Reign agents spotted him and fired a missile at his apartment. The apartment was destroyed, but as the smoke cleared, Spider-Man leapt out cheerfully in his full black costume, taunting his enemies just as he had once done in his prime. When a Reign agent tried to arrest Jameson, the crowd of kids and adults attacked the agent. The girl believed they'd been inspired by watching Spider-Man fight again, but the crowd's courage collapsed when Kraven appeared, impaling Casey on his large knife, with the rest of the Sinner 6 standing behind him. Cornered by the Sinner 6, Spider-Man was beaten, and Kraven tore off his mask as the crowd's spirit sank even further when they saw their hero was just an old, defeated man. At the last moment, he was saved by the late Dr. Octopus, a former enemy whose mechanical tentacles were still active after his death in order to carry out his final command. They brought Peter to the graves of Mary Jane, Aunt May, and Uncle Ben, forcing him to face his grief. Meanwhile, in the mayor's tower, a captured Jameson lashed out at Waters and Sachs, only for Sachs to reveal his true identity as Venom. Venom activated the web system to project his own substance across the city, transforming New Yorkers into symbiote-controlled slaves under his command, while the barrier kept everyone trapped inside. He explained he was doing this so he'd never be alone again, as he had been after the death of his former host, Eddie Brock. Back at the gravesite, Octopus's tentacles dug Mary Jane's body from her coffin and placed Peter's arms around her, forcing him to confront his deepest fear, that in her final moments, she had told him to go in disgust when he wanted to leave and stop a robbery. Instead, he realized she had meant, "Go get him, Tiger." The tentacles then buried themselves, Octopus's body, and Mary Jane together in a new grave, while Peter climbed into MJ's old coffin to retrieve his classic red and blue suit, which he had buried with her. Elsewhere, the girl from earlier was chased by a large symbiote and fled back to the ruined church, where the kids had regrouped after the riot. The symbiote caught up and absorbed the children there. In desperation, the girl struck the church bell and kept striking it when she saw the sound hurting the creature. She rallied the surviving kids to use this discovery, along with their youth and determination, to drive the symbiotes back toward the tower. Spider-Man made it to the tower and began climbing it, where he killed or took down the Sinner Six one by one, all except the Sandman, who was on the ground floor. There, the girl and other kids from the church arrived, having pushed some of the symbiotes back to the tower. Sandman yelled at them to go home. The girl gave a speech linking anger, courage, and truth, then revealed her own power. She could turn her body into solid cement. The rain guards then opened fire, scattering the rest of the kids, even as Sandman screamed at them to stop, having realized the girl was his daughter. She held her ground as the gunfire broke her limbs into chunks, and Sandman turned on the guards. He tried to comfort her and explain how to regenerate, but symbiotes interrupted him, and after driving them off, he found she had reverted to human form and died. At the top of the tower, Spider-Man confronted Venom. The fight spilled up to the tower's peak, where the web system sat, and Spider-Man was losing the fight as Venom summoned every symbiote to the tower to help him. At the last moment, Sandman arrived, having apparently killed the fleeing mayor on his way to the top of the tower, and handed Spider-Man the detonator for the explosives implanted in his teammates. Spider-Man triggered it, and the bodies of the six, scattered across the tower's many floors, exploded, destroying the tower, the web, Venom, and the symbiotes. With Venom and Rain defeated, Jameson reported that crime had climbed back to where it was years ago, but so had the superheroes. Visiting Mary Jane's grave, Peter said he'd join her in peace one day, but until then, he still had responsibilities to attend to. House of M Spider-Man. Earth 58-163 was created by Wanda Maximoff when driven to madness by her own reality-warping powers and grief over losing her children. Wanda reshaped the world into one where people she loved each received their deepest wish. Much like the mainline Spider-Man, Peter was raised by Aunt May and Uncle Ben and attended Midtown High School. He was bitten by a spider that had been hit by a particle beam and given spider-like powers, which he used for underground wrestling to make money. After a match against Crusher Hogan, a talent scout in the crowd promised to set up a TV appearance, so Peter rushed home and built himself a more elaborate costume, and with that, Spider-Man was officially born. After his first television appearance, Peter tackled a burglar fleeing past him, saving the wrestling arena's owner thousands of dollars. Grateful, the owner thanked him by promising Spider-Man a starring spot in his brand new wrestling league. The league became a massive hit with Spider-Man as its star. As the money came in, Peter decided to show his aunt and uncle the abilities the spider bite had given him. May was frightened by them at first, but Ben was overjoyed. Proud of his nephew and able to see that these powers had given Peter a confidence and self-belief he'd never seen before. Around this time, a mutant-human war broke out in earnest. The press accused Spider-Man of being a mutant, and Peter wanted to deny it, but Uncle Ben urged him to stay silent. Ben could see that Peter had become an idol to mutants everywhere, and he believed that if Peter could give hope to children born different from ordinary humans, he should. Ben's advice paid off when the war ended with mutants victorious. As the most public and beloved mutant, Peter revealed his real identity and became an international superstar, working as both a wrestler and an actor. He even starred in a film alongside his high school friend Mary Jane Watson. A controversial choice since ordinary humans rarely landed major leading roles, but the movie launched Mary Jane's career and cemented Peter as a movie star. Soon after, Peter stepped back from public life. He married his high school sweetheart, Gwen Stacy, and the two attended college together, both earning doctorates. When Peter returned to the spotlight, he and Uncle Ben founded Spider-Man Incorporated, branching into many fields including science and charity work. With a family that now included his young son, Richard, Peter Parker had become the envy of the world and its most popular mutant, yet he soon sensed that something was wrong, and he had begun to worry about his secret. What would happen if the world learned he wasn't truly a mutant? The world did find out when J. Jonah Jameson discovered a journal of Peter's. Inside was not only the truth that Peter was not a mutant, but also that he knew this world wasn't the way things were meant to be. That Gwen, Uncle Ben, and Gwen's father were all supposed to be dead. It would later come to light that the Green Goblin had led Jameson to the journal. This changed everything. The world turned against Peter, so much so that at one point a boy was nearly beaten to death simply for wearing a Spider-Man shirt. Most shocking of all, it was in fact Peter himself, dressed in the Green Goblin outfit, who had given Jameson the journal, wanting the truth to be revealed. When Gwen and the rest of the family read the journal, they assumed Peter had invented the whole thing and that he had lost his mind. And, in the end, Peter and his family moved to the countryside to live a quiet, peaceful life. Man Spider. On Earth 51412, Patton Parnell was a disturbed young man who lived with his abusive uncle Ted, experimented on animals in his free time, and made a habit of perversely spying on his neighbor, Sarah Jane. One day, during a trip to Alcorp Industries, Sarah Jane actually approached Patton and asked for his help exposing the company's illegal animal experimentation. Sarah Jane then pulled Patton into a lab to free the test animals. However, distracted by a huge red spider, Patton reached out to grab it and got bitten. Afterwards, security caught him, dragged him out of the building, and sent him home. The next day, Patton was having feelings of intense hunger but couldn't keep food down, so he impulsively ate a mouse, which became the first moment he encountered his spider-like abilities. He then tried eating a cat and discovered he could produce webbing. As he filled the house with cocoons, his Uncle Ted came home. Immediately, Patton completed his transformation into a spider-like monster and attacked his uncle. Patton briefly considered using his powers for good as a superhero, but dismissed the idea as boring. Sarah Jane, meanwhile, had been researching the spider that had bitten Patton and then went to Patton's house looking for Jean, the missing school bully of Octavius High School. Patton encountered her and kissed her before then biting her neck. She slapped him, and he once again transformed into the monstrous spider creature before revealing that the bite he had just given to Sarah Jane implanted eggs in her, an ability he had already used on his uncle and a boy from the neighborhood. He declared a twisted love for Sarah Jane, but before he could do more to her, the multiversal spider totem hunter Morlun appeared and drained Patton's life force. Sarah Jane then fled, but the next morning, baby spiders would emerge from the bite marks on her neck. Darkhold Spider-Man. One day in the main Marvel universe of Earth 616, the demon Chthon was able to retrieve the Darkhold, a book of dark magic, and used it to unleash something known as the Unraveling. Sent out from a place called the Other Realm, the Unraveling caused matter within the realities it touched to gradually decompose. Seeing how dangerous this was, the Scarlet Witch put together a team of heroes to stop Chthon. Following this, on Earth 73640, Spider-Man had a backstory similar to the mainline Peter Parker's. However, in this world, Gwen Stacy never died, and as a result, the two of them were eventually married. This world's Spider-Man was on patrol when the Unraveling hit, causing everyone in New York City to slowly and painfully crumble apart. Spider-Man tried to hold the city and its people together by covering everyone and everything in New York in his webbing, and it actually worked. For a while. But the web slowly dissolved over time, forcing him to constantly re-web the entirety of the city. As the stress of this wore him down and his sanity deteriorated, he also became vulnerable to the corrupting influence of the Darkhold. In desperation, he turned to Reed Richards for help. Reed suggested fusing his webbing with the Venom Symbiote, since it would hold up better than standard webbing. Spider-Man tracked down Venom, finding the symbiote in a weakened state as it was bonded to the corpse of Eddie Brock. He managed to subdue it and fuse it with his webbing in Reed's lab, using the upgraded webbing to keep the city together, but by the time he realized how late he was getting home that day, he rushed back to find that Gwen Stacy had fully succumbed to the Unraveling. Sometime later, Peter went to Reed's lab. Reed had already heard about Gwen's death and offered his condolences, but Peter suddenly injected him with a chemical that knocked Reed unconscious. Peter then fused his webbing with Reed himself, since Reed's stretchy body proved even stronger than his original webbing or the symbiote-enhanced version. With this upgrade, he bound the entire city once more, condemning his former friend to an existence of constant pain and torment in this process. Even though it caused Reed endless suffering, the webbing worked. The city's people were able to live something close to a normal life thanks to how strong and durable it was. Reed repeatedly begged Peter to free him from the agony, but an increasingly unhinged Peter told him his new job was to keep the city stable. Patient Zero. On Earth 11080, the Punisher accidentally released Survivor 118, a chemical created to help people adapt to a post-apocalyptic environment. After the contaminant spread throughout New York City, Spider-Man was the first to show its effects, consuming the Rhino on live television. The Fantastic Four quickly subdued him and put him in quarantine for study. Reed Richards assembled a team of scientists to figure out what caused Spider-Man's sudden change, and they soon discovered the chemical had altered his DNA, turning him more predatory and giving him a craving for human flesh. Ben Grimm was one of the first Beyond Spider-Man to succumb to the plague, and for reasons that remain unclear, he freed Spider-Man from his cage. Following this, the infection continued spreading until the world collapsed, as heroes and villains alike turned into rabid cannibals, until only the Punisher remained to stand against them. A turf war eventually broke out among the cannibal tribes. Spider-Man, now called Patient Zero, proved the most successful of the tribe leaders, taking control of Manhattan while other tribes moved to claim new territory. The Kingpin, now known as the King of Death, built his own power by wiping out rival tribes and soon brought his forces into Manhattan to challenge Patient Zero. He killed many of Patient Zero's people and managed to capture his mate, Mary Jane. Desperate to save her, Patient Zero turned to the Punisher for help, offering him information on hidden survivors and a promise to leave them alone in exchange for killing the King of Death. Frank was hesitant at first but agreed, setting out with Patient Zero's tribesmen Deadpool, Black Widow, and Scorpion to hold up his end of the deal. After facing some difficulties, the Punisher won and brought Mary Jane back, but as Patient Zero celebrated, Frank shot him point blank in the head, ending Patient Zero's life. The Spider. Peter Benjamin Parker is the main character of The Spider, a 2024 short horror film from Locust Garden Pictures. During a visit to a lab, Peter was distracted by scientists at work when a radioactive spider bit him on the hand. Later that night, he was outside in an alley examining the bite when two robbers ran him over. One suggested robbing him while he was unconscious, while his partner doubted someone so young would even be carrying a wallet. The first robber tried anyway, grabbing Peter's hand, only for Peter, now empowered by the spider bite, to accidentally tear the skin off the robber's hand. Dazed and confused, Peter returned home to wash the blood off his hand, only to discover his hands now stuck to any surface they touched. He then tested his new agility by leaping from roof to roof around his neighborhood until he began to feel ill. Back in his bedroom, he vomited, assuming it was just shock from the experience. But looking in the mirror, he noticed one of his teeth was missing, and on closer inspection, he realized all of his teeth were rapidly falling out. Overwhelmed by the shock and pain of his own transformation, Peter passed out. Later, now at school, Peter's teacher and fellow student Gwen woke him as he slept in class, and upon waking up, he was bleeding from the nose and had liquid oozing from his mouth. His teacher tried to keep things calm, but Peter cried out in pain and passed out again. He woke up in an ambulance where a paramedic attempted to talk to him. Peter looked down and saw his own hair stuck to his hand, which sent him into a panic. He began seizing, and as the paramedics tried to hold him down, a spider-like arm burst out from his shirt and killed both of them. Now in mid-transformation, Peter locked himself in his room to avoid hurting anyone. Uncle Ben, unaware that Peter was behind the recent spider power incidents reported by J. Jonah Jameson, tried to talk to him, and Peter tried to warn him away, but Ben entered Peter's room anyway, despite noticing blood on the door handle, and Peter lost control and killed him. Later, Aunt May returned from shopping, finding Peter's door half open. She stepped in and found the room covered in webs, and her nephew, now more spider than human, eating Ben. In the post-credit scenes, Mary Jane Watson is seen fleeing through an alleyway, presumably from Peter, as the fully transformed spider ambushes her and devours her. The Goblin. On Earth 2120, Peter Parker's life closely mirrored that of the mainline Spider-Man up until the death of Gwen Stacy. Consumed by grief, this Peter crossed a line his mainline counterpart never did by killing Norman Osborn, and as a result gave up being Spider-Man for good. Rather than walking away entirely though, he took Osborn's weapons and gear and made them his own, repainting them and becoming a new version of the Goblin. A Spider-Woman from a different dimension, who was a variant of Gwen Stacy, tried to recruit this Goblin Peter into a growing team of spider heroes being assembled to fight off a threat called the Inheritors. He turned her down at first, but changed his mind once he learned who she really was. Not long after joining, he sacrificed his life to save hers, since it was something he'd been unable to do for Gwen before. Chasm. In the main Marvel universe, Ben Reilly is a clone of Peter Parker, created by the villain Miles Warren, otherwise known as the Jackal, to torment Peter. Ben seemingly died in their first encounter, but he actually survived and spent 5 years in exile, only returning to New York after learning Peter's Aunt May was ill. After reconciling with Peter, Ben fought by his side as the Scarlet Spider. For a time, Norman Osborn manipulated events to convince both men that Ben was the original Peter Parker and Peter was the clone. Believing this, Peter left New York with his wife Mary Jane Watson, leaving Ben to take up the role of Spider-Man. Later, during a battle with Osborn as the Green Goblin, Ben was fatally impaled and died in Peter's arms, with the truth finally revealed that Peter had been the real Peter Parker all along. Ben was later resurrected by Miles Warren, who spent years repeatedly killing and reviving him to perfect his cloning technology. This drove Ben mad, and he eventually broke free and took Warren's place as the new Jackal. He founded New U Technologies, hoping to use cloning for good, but the plan went wrong and Spider-Man was forced to stop him. Still seeking redemption despite his fragile mental state, Ben relocated to Las Vegas and returned to his role as the Scarlet Spider. Eventually, Ben took up the Spider-Man mantle again, this time as a corporate-sponsored hero for the Beyond Corporation, in exchange for being reunited with his long-lost lover. When Ben tried to expose the company's secret manufacturing of supervillains, its head, Maxine Danger, had half his memories wiped to keep him under control. Already unstable, Ben became paranoid and distrustful. Then, during the collapse of Beyond headquarters, Ben was submerged in a mutating psychoactive polymer. He should have died again, but instead emerged with most of his old personality erased, and a new purple and black appearance, with a new identity as well: Chasm. As the villainous Chasm, Ben became vengeful and bitter toward Peter, now wanting to steal his memories and life. He partnered with Madeline Pryor, a clone of Jean Grey, who had become ruler of Limbo, a demonic pocket universe, since the two were united by their shared situation as flawed clones chasing stolen memories. During the Dark Web storyline, Ben stole Madeline's scythe and briefly ruled over Limbo's demons, transforming into a hulking, winged, horned version of himself, but he eventually lost the scythe, and with it, its power. He was then confined in the Limbo Embassy, a gateway between Earth and Limbo in New York City, before ultimately escaping. Kaine Parker. Kaine Parker's existence began as the Jackal's very first attempt at cloning Peter Parker. The cloning process appeared to work perfectly at first, but a flaw in the creation process caused Kaine's body to become increasingly deformed over time. Alongside the physical decay, he also grew mentally unstable. Rather than end the experiment, the Jackal kept Kaine alive purely to observe how long he could survive in this deteriorating state, and Kaine ended up surviving far longer than the Jackal ever anticipated. Believing he was a failure compared to Ben Reilly, who turned out more stable, Kaine spent years wandering as a violent drifter, oftentimes working as an assassin. He was haunted by broken pieces of Peter's memories, which he mistakenly believed were his own, and this confusion led him into repeated conflicts with both Peter and Ben, usually as an antagonist, though his actions were typically driven by confusion and self-loathing rather than genuine malice. During the Spider Island storyline, Kaine underwent another mutation, transforming him into a monstrous creature called Tarantula. He was eventually cured, and the cure not only restored his human appearance, but also permanently removed the degeneration that had plagued him for most of his life. With a fresh start, Kaine left New York City and relocated to Houston, Texas, where he took on a new identity as the Scarlet Spider, protecting the city as a more brutal and violent version of Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man. On Earth-616, when Otto Octavius was dying from a terminal illness, he devised a plan to swap minds with Peter Parker, intending to leave Peter trapped in Otto's dying body while Otto took over Peter's young and healthy one. This experiment worked, but as Peter lay dying, he secretly used a mental technique to pass all of his own memories and experiences into Otto's mind. As a result, Otto ended up in full control of Peter's body, but now carrying Peter's complete memories along with his own. Intending to become a superior Spider-Man to Parker, Otto took up the mantle of Spider-Man. Now known as the Superior Spider-Man, Otto initially kept his own harsh, self-centered personality even while living Peter's life. He fought crime with brutal efficiency, relied on surveillance systems and robotic drones, and had little of Peter's usual restraint or humor. Over time, though, Peter's memories and values began to shape Otto's actions, gradually pushing him toward real heroism, a protective instinct towards Peter's loved ones like Aunt May and Mary Jane, and a growing sense of responsibility much like Peter's own. While living Peter's life, Otto finished Peter's doctoral work, founded Parker Industries, and started a relationship with Anna Maria Marconi, a fellow student at Empire State University. Yet, although Otto had initially wiped out Peter's lingering consciousness, Peter's mind eventually started to resurface. Then, during an encounter following Norman Osborn emerging as the Goblin King and threatening Anna Maria, Otto came to realize that Peter is, in fact, the Superior Spider-Man, and willingly gave him back control of his body, seemingly killing Otto. However, a digital backup of Otto's mind survived, and it eventually took control of a robotic body called the Living Brain. Later, using cloning technology from the Jackal, Otto transferred his digital mind into a new body made from a mix of his and Spider-Man's genes, eventually taking on the identity of the Superior Octopus. Doppelganger. Doppelganger was an evil, nearly mindless clone of Spider-Man created by the villain Magus during the Infinity War conflict. Using strange duplicating bodies called M-bodies, sourced from a being named Anthropomorpho, Magus produced many such evil copies of heroes, and this version of Spider-Man was one of them. Doppelganger is a hulking, fanged creature with multiple extra arms and clawed hands. It shares Spider-Man's core abilities, but its strength far exceeds his. While Spider-Man can lift around 10 tons, Doppelganger can press roughly 65 tons, along with having superhuman agility, stamina, reflexes, and speed. It can also fire razor-sharp webbing and cling to walls. Despite all these powers, it has only ever shown animal-level instinct rather than true human intelligence. Doppelganger was killed during the Infinity War by Hobgoblin, but was later brought back to life through magic by Demogoblin. When Magus was ultimately defeated by Adam Warlock, ending the Infinity War, all the other Doppelgangers were destroyed, but the Spider Doppelganger survived because Demogoblin's magic had created a psychic link between the two of them. Doppelganger later joined Carnage, Shriek, Carrion, and Demogoblin during the notorious Maximum Carnage killing spree. During this time, Shriek became something of an adoptive mother to Doppelganger, which made him more dangerous since he would follow any of her commands. When Carnage eventually turned against Shriek, Doppelganger stepped in to defend her, and Carnage responded by stabbing him and throwing him off a skyscraper. Even so, Doppelganger has managed to return several times, consistently undergoing death and resurrection time and again. Spidercide. Spidercide is another clone of Peter Parker created by the Jackal, and this clone turned out to be the Jackal's final successful attempt at replicating Peter. Following its creation, the clone was kept in a stasis pod to hold him in suspended animation until the Jackal needed him for some undetermined future purpose. When he finally woke up, Spidercide was convinced he was the original Peter Parker. He tracked down Peter's wife, Mary Jane Watson, and tried desperately to make her believe his claim. This drew him into conflict with the real Spider-Man along with his other clones, Ben Reilly and Kaine Parker. Unbeknownst to Spidercide, the Jackal had wired a hidden failsafe programming into his body. Once Peter, Ben, Kaine, and Mary Jane were all in the same place at the same time, that programming triggered, unleashing shape-shifting powers and warping him into a monstrous form. In the fight that followed, Kaine killed Spidercide, but the Jackal secretly retrieved his body following the conflict and brought him back to life. Once Spidercide stopped denying what he really was, he fully embraced being a villain. At one point, he helped the Jackal steal an airborne version of the carrion virus over the town of Springfield, Pennsylvania, killing more than 2,600 people. He later turned on the Jackal, betraying him to a mysterious figure called Scryer, who turned out to be part of a secret organization loyal to Norman Osborn. In return for the betrayal, Scryer removed the genetic deterioration built into Spidercide's cloned body, the same flaw that had caused other Spider-Man clones to physically break down over time. Spidercide later returned as an enemy of Ben Reilly, but their conflict ended with Spidercide using the last of his strength to actually save Ben's life in an act of brotherhood. His remains were then taken for study by Dr. Ashley Kafka. Over the years, Spidercide kept coming back to life and reappearing in various Spider-Man stories, regularly clashing with Peter, his fellow clones, and the Jackal. Flash Thompson Spider-Man. On Earth 18139, history followed the same path as the main Marvel universe up until Peter's famous spider bite. In this universe, it was Flash Thompson, the high school bully of Peter Parker, rather than Peter himself, who got bitten by the spider, gaining spider-like superhuman abilities as a result. Flash first put his powers to use as a professional wrestler, performing under the name Spider-Man at RKP Palace. One night, he helped a security guard catch a burglar, and after that, he chose to become a full-time superhero, even dropping out of Midtown High School to focus entirely on heroics. As a result, Flash wasn't around to save John Jameson when he needed rescuing, and J. Jonah Jameson believed his son John's death was the result of a government cover-up, leading to the Daily Bugle starting to back vigilantes like Spider-Man. Even so, the public soured on Flash Spider-Man because of his violent tactics, which Peter Parker had captured on film. One day, Flash came home to find Peter waiting for him in his trailer. Peter was there to ask for help retrieving ISO-36, a rare radioactive isotope that had been stolen by the Master Planner and that could cure Aunt May's blood cancer, but Flash, overcome with rage over Peter turning the public against him, punched Peter, accidentally killing him. Shaken by what he'd done, Flash set out as Spider-Man to prove to himself that he could still be a hero. He tracked down the isotope, but during his fight with the Master Planner, he knocked out a support pillar and brought the building down on himself. He managed to escape the wreckage, and as a result of this experience, he realized he wasn't a hero, and rather was a bully. He delivered the ISO-36 to Forest Hills Hospital so Aunt May could be cured, then gave up being Spider-Man for good by confessing to killing Peter and turning himself into the police. Werewolf Spider-Man. On Earth 7085, nearly every Marvel character exists as a bloodthirsty, flesh-eating werewolf. Ash Williams from the Evil Dead franchise once stumbled into this reality on accident, and among the werewolf versions of Marvel heroes native to this world was Spider-Man, reimagined as Spider-Wolf. Spider-Wolf was later one of several spider heroes pulled into Earth 31913 by the Spider God. Alongside other summoned spider heroes, he joined a team called the Web Warriors to help that world's native hero, Web Slinger, defend his reality from an invasion of symbiotes. Webslinger was initially wary of Spider-Wolf, doubting he could keep his werewolf instincts in check, and even attempted to kill him. But Spider-Wolf eventually won his trust by saving his life, and the two went on to work together to save the world. Spider-Wolf went on to have more adventures across the multiverse, eventually joining Miguel O'Hara's Spider Society. Bullet points. On Earth 7105, Peter Parker's uncle Ben Parker was killed during World War II while trying to protect Dr. Abraham Erskine. Peter's parents died as well, so he was raised by Ben's widow May. Without Ben around to teach him the importance of responsibility, Peter grew up angry and rebellious, becoming something of a troublemaker in the 1940s. During a field trip to a desert base, Peter snuck off with friends and went joyriding in a stolen Jeep. When the Jeep broke down, he went looking for fuel and accidentally stumbled into a test site right as a gamma bomb went off. He recovered from the explosion, made it home, but his two friends later confronted him, blaming him for getting them into trouble. Peter's anger triggered his transformation into the Hulk, who went on a rampage. Police arrived to confront the Hulk, and Aunt May recognized him as Peter, which triggered a heart attack. Distressed by what had happened to May, the Hulk fled the scene. Following Peter's transformation, the recently retired Steve Rogers was called back into service, this time wearing the Iron Man armor, and tasked with capturing Peter. Peter had gone to say goodbye to Aunt May in the hospital before planning to run away, but was confronted there by Iron Man and a group of army troops. Peter refused Rogers' attempt to calm him down and transformed into the Hulk to face Iron Man. Their fight outside the hospital dragged on until the Hulk ultimately killed Iron Man and, realizing what he'd done, Peter fled in terror once again. Sometime in the future, when Galactus arrived on Earth, the Hulk came out of hiding to attack him, but was killed after being struck by the power cosmic. Peter's brave death moved the Silver Surfer to turn against Galactus and fight him, eventually driving him away from Earth. Peter was then laid to rest next to Steve Rogers. In the same universe, Dr. Bruce Banner, who had helped invent the Gamma Bomb, had felt personally responsible for Peter's transformation. He dedicated himself to researching the Hulk's origins and had concluded that he needed a blood sample from Peter to develop a cure. But when he brought this plan to S.H.I.E.L.D. director Reed Richards, he was turned down since S.H.I.E.L.D. couldn't risk losing Banner in an encounter with the Hulk. Frustrated, Banner returned to work and began dissecting a spider that had survived the same blast that transformed Peter. The spider bit him, altering his DNA, and because he was bitten as an adult, his body couldn't handle the change, leading to his own rampage as he broke free from the military installation and then evaded S.H.I.E.L.D. for 2 years. After being captured and undergoing years of gene therapy and heavy medication, Banner eventually became S.H.I.E.L.D.'s newest recruit, now known as Spider-Man. Man Spider 6078. On Earth 6078, Peter lived a similar life to his mainline counterpart up to the death of Uncle Ben, as in this universe, Aunt May died in a sudden accident, while Uncle Ben survived. With May gone, Peter found himself worrying about the family's finances and how he would help keep them afloat. So rather than give up his costumed wrestling and show business career, Peter proposed a practical solution to his uncle. Ben would act as his agent, while Peter kept earning money through his wrestling and entertainment appearances. This arrangement let Peter cash his checks in through Ben rather than risk exposing his identity as Spider-Man by handling the money himself. With this came newfound success, and as a result, Peter's ego grew. He became arrogant and used his powers mainly to show off and earn money rather than take responsibility as a hero, leaving other heroes to handle the villains who might otherwise have crossed his path. Eventually, he moved out on his own, continuing to send Ben a portion of his earnings, but by that point it had become more a matter of routine than a genuine sense of care or obligation toward his uncle. Eventually, the machinations of a future version of the Hobgoblin caused Uncle Ben to be transported into the mainstream Earth 616 universe. This displacement set off a chain of events that 20 years later culminated in Spider-Man transforming into the monstrous Man Spider. In this horrified new form, Peter fought and even managed to kill the Avengers. Dark Ages Miles Morales. On Earth 80763, Miles Morales had a similar backstory to that of the mainline Miles Morales. However, a powerful machine known as the Unmaker emerged, and although the threat was eventually stopped, a portal left open by this world's Doctor Strange during the battle released an EMP blast that knocked out technology across the planet. Miles survived the fallout of this event and would live on as society worked to rebuild in its aftermath. At some point during the early rebuilding period from this apocalyptic moment, Miles bonded with the Venom symbiote and the two formed a working partnership. That changed when the Carnage symbiote forcibly bonded to him as well, corrupting Venom in the process. Together, the two symbiotes overpowered Miles, taking control of him as their host, and struck a deal with the mutant villain Apocalypse. They would serve him in exchange for a spaceship that would let them flee Earth before the Unmaker awakened once more. Under Apocalypse's control, the symbiote-possessed Spider-Man was sent to stop a group of survivors after Quicksilver had warned them about the villain's plan. When the group reached Europe, Miles attacked them and tried to kill them until Virginia Potts used fire against him. This broke the Venom and Carnage symbiote's hold on Miles, and Storm finished the job by destroying the symbiotes with a blast of lightning. Freed and back in control, Miles explained that Apocalypse's scheme involved seizing control of the Unmaker, and then explained how he ended up as Apocalypse's puppet. The group then traveled to Paris, and during the battle against Apocalypse, Apocalypse's ally Dracula betrayed him and turned him into a vampire, leading to Blade stepping in and killing both Apocalypse and Dracula. Spider-Man Noir. On Earth 90214, Peter Parker was raised during the Great Depression by his aunt and uncle, May and Ben Parker. Peter grew up supporting his aunt and uncle's activism work, but Ben was murdered in retaliation by a businessman for organizing a strike against sweatshops. The businessman was mob boss Norman Osborn, otherwise known as the Goblin. Sometime later, Peter assisted May at a rally in Hooverville, a shantytown built by displaced homeless people during the Depression. The two faced a violent response from the Enforcers, a trio of ruthless hired thugs and former circus carnies who served as the muscle for Osborn, but they were rescued by Ben Urich. Peter then became Urich's protege at the Daily Bugle newspaper, where he investigated the hardships facing New York City's residents, particularly those threatened by Osborn. After Peter accidentally received the tip meant for Urich, he went to a warehouse where Osborn's men were unloading a shipment of stolen antiques. One of the antiques, a spider idol, broke open and released a swarm of spiders. Peter was bitten by one of them, causing him to pass out and dream of a being called the Spider God. When he woke up, he found he now had spider-like superpowers. Peter, while wearing a mask, then went to confront Norman Osborn at his home to try to force him to give up his control over the city, but he was shocked to find Urich there, who had been blackmailing Osborn using his knowledge of the mob boss's dealings in exchange for money to feed his personal drug addiction. Peter cut ties with Urich, and once back home, he fashioned a costume inspired by his uncle's World War I airman's uniform and became the vigilante known as Spider-Man. Peter then went to Urich's apartment to pressure him into helping take down the Goblin, but found him dead instead. Peter then chose to begin disrupting the Goblin's criminal activities, while the Bugle newspaper began portraying Spider-Man negatively. In response, he went to the Bugle building to confront Jonah Jameson about it, only to discover Jameson had been shot and killed. Peter later learned that the man he'd seen wasn't really Jameson at all. Jameson had been replaced by a shape-shifting impersonator known as the Chameleon. At the same time, the real Jameson was being held prisoner by Osborn. This discovery led Peter to hunt for Jameson, a search that led him into confrontation with the Vulture, the same man responsible for murdering Ben Parker, and Peter killed the Vulture to stop him from killing Aunt May. Even though Peter had saved his aunt, May criticized him for killing the Vulture since he could have stopped him without resorting to killing given his powers. She told him that taking lives would diminish what made him human. Spider-Man later tracked Osborn to his torture house and found him and his enforcers holding Felicia Hardy, Urich's previous lover, and Jameson captive. He learned that Osborn had intended to kill Urich, recover the reporter's information on him that Felicia had been keeping, and then eliminate every witness. He also discovered that Felicia had killed the Chameleon after witnessing him murder Urich while disguised as Jameson. Spider-Man defeated the enforcers, rescued Jameson, and chased down Osborn, who had taken Felicia hostage and cornered him. Peter had the opportunity to kill Osborn, but chose not to, and instead the mob boss was killed by Sergei Kravinoff. Months after the Goblin's death, Spider-Man investigated a dangerous new mob boss known as the Crime Master. During this investigation, Peter grew infatuated with Felicia, though she didn't reciprocate his feelings to the same degree since their lives were very different. Peter later interviewed Dr. Otto Octavius alongside his friend and fellow news writer Robbie Robertson. Robbie strongly suspected something sinister about the Doctor and tried to convince Peter of it, though Peter didn't take these suspicions too seriously. Peter then learned that the Crime Master was abducting many African American minorities and was shocked to discover that Robbie had also been kidnapped. After his first clash with the Crime Master, Spider-Man was brutally beaten by the Crime Master's enforcer Sandman until he was rescued by federal agent Jean DeWolf. Spider-Man then teamed up with DeWolf to stop the Crime Master, eventually deducing that Dr. Octavius was involved in the kidnappings. Spider-Man traveled to Octavius' laboratory on Ellis Island, where he was shocked to discover that the Doctor was aligned with the Friends of New Germany, an American Nazi sympathizing organization, and had been experimenting on the abducted African American minorities to turn them into mindless slaves. Spider-Man freed the prisoners, but arrived too late to save Robbie, who had already been lobotomized. He clashed with the Crime Master a second time when the mob boss took Robbie hostage just before DeWolf's agents reached the island. After getting Robbie to safety, Peter learned that the Crime Master had supposedly killed Felicia Hardy, who was revealed to be the Crime Master's own lover. Spider-Man then witnessed Octavius betray and kill the Crime Master, and then Spider-Man tried to strangle Octavius to death for his crimes and for what he'd done to Robbie, but was stopped by DeWolf. Back in Manhattan, Spider-Man learned from DeWolf that Felicia had actually survived and went to her apartment to see her. There, her bodyguard told him she was recovering from her injuries but never wanted to see Spider-Man again, as she blamed him for her condition since the Crime Master had discovered her secret feelings for the vigilante and attacked her because of it. After this, Peter went on to have several adventures across the multiverse alongside other Spider-Men. Arachknight. In the main Marvel universe, after gaining the Infinity Stones, Gamora trapped every soul in the universe inside the Soul Gem. To keep those souls helpless, she folded the universe in half, causing each soul to merge with another. This created Warp World, a pocket dimension where history was rewritten to fit the newly fused beings. Within Warp World, Spider-Man and Moon Knight were merged into a single being called Arachknight. In the Warp World, when Peter Parker was a child, he visited the World Science Festival at the American Museum of Natural History with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben. On the way home, Peter talked them into walking through Central Park instead of taking a cab. They were attacked by a mysterious monster known as Goblin by Night. Ben and May were killed, and Peter was fatally wounded. As he lay dying, Peter was bitten by a mystical spider. This saved his life and gave him superpowers, but it also split his mind into 4 separate personalities. Peter first tried to suppress these voices, but eventually chose to let each one take control of his body at different times, effectively dividing his life among them. The first alter, called the Arachnid, is the dominant personality of Arachknight and is mostly light-hearted, as it enjoys taunting enemies with jokes and quips. The second alter, known as the Knight, is darker and more aggressive, acting serious and intense, but is most effective at finishing off fights with criminals. It also serves as Peter's fight-or-flight response, taking over when things get especially dangerous. The third alter, called CEO Peter, is the confident head of Parker Industries. The fourth alter, Science Peter, is a passionate working scientist who is afraid of heights and the least athletic of the 4. Over time, Peter became a successful businessman running Parker Industries while secretly working as the vigilante Arachknight. His best friend Harry Russell served as his right-hand man in both roles, often stepping in to make sure the CEO persona showed up when the company needed him. One day, Peter discovered that Harry's father was in fact able to transform into the Goblin by Night, and as Arachknight, Peter tracked him to Central Park and beat him down. Harry then tased Peter from behind, and once Norman turned back into his human form, Harry took him away. Harry brought his injured father to the sublevels of Parker Industries for treatment, but Norman transformed again and went on a rampage, which included biting Harry on the neck. The Goblin tore through the building until reaching Peter, who beat him down once again. Just as Peter was about to deliver the killing blow, a dying Harry arrived on a prototype glider and talked him out of killing Norman, pointing out that Norman hadn't been in control when he killed Ben and May, but Peter's revenge would be a deliberate choice. Harry then suddenly transformed into the Goblin himself and fled on the glider. Norman revealed that his bite had passed the curse on to his son, and Peter promised Norman that they'd work together to find a cure for Harry. After Gamora was defeated, Adam Warlock chose to preserve Warp World with a facet of the Soul Gem so that beings created there wouldn't simply disappear. Within Warp World, several of the heroes of Arachknight later decided to band together and formed a team known as the Defenders. The Hunter. On Earth 11209, Spider-Man ignored Madam Web's warning and, in a fit of rage, killed Kraven the Hunter. Horrified by what he'd done, he initially quit being Spider-Man to settle down with Mary Jane Watson, but he couldn't stay away from the fight, and eventually returned to the role, this time without any hesitation about killing his enemies. He hunted down and killed several of his foes, including Norman Osborn, and when Mary Jane confronted him about it, he concluded that the world didn't need a Spider-Man anymore. It needed a hunter to protect the herd. So he gave up his Spider-Man identity entirely and became the Hunter, taking over Kraven's old role. Meanwhile, Madame Web tried to convince Anya Corazon to take over as the new Spider-Girl, but she initially refused. With no replacement lined up, Madame Web instead recruited Venom, Spider-Woman, and Anti-Venom to fight Peter directly. They succeeded in killing Peter's pack, but Peter killed all three of them in return and left Madame Web seriously injured. Before dying, Madame Web managed to teleport Anya so that she could fight Peter. Peter initially had the upper hand and fired his gun at her, but it misfired and blinded him instead, giving Anya the advantage. Peter begged her to kill him, telling her that anyone he hurt afterward would be on her conscience, but Anya chose to spare him rather than kill him, echoing the choice Spider-Man made in the mainline universe. As a result, Peter was left to live out an ordinary life while Anya took up the mantle of Spider-Girl. Old Man Symbiote. On Earth 1089, the Venom symbiote bonded with Spider-Man during the Secret Wars, just as it did on Earth 616, but in this reality, Spider-Man didn't learn what the black suit actually was until later in the bonding process, and once he understood, he could no longer separate himself from it. Mr. Fantastic and Doctor Strange both attempted to free him from the symbiote, but neither succeeded. Thus, the symbiote permanently bonded with Spider-Man, taking control of his mind and feeding off his adrenaline, which caused him to age at an accelerated rate. Once his body could no longer support the symbiote, it used him to get close to the Hulk so it could transfer itself to him, abandoning Spider-Man in the process. As a result of the rapid aging, Peter had become physically equivalent to being 85 years old. After saying his goodbyes, Mr. Fantastic found him dead, surrounded by research he had conducted into finding a way to kill the symbiote. A funeral was then held for Peter, which was attended by the Avengers. Bloodline Peter Parker. On Earth 29320, Peter Parker's life unfolded much like his mainstream Marvel counterparts, although in this version of events he married Mary Jane Watson, and the couple had a son together named Ben. When Ben was still young, New York City came under attack from a villain named Cadaverous and his forces. Spider-Man fought to defend the city's citizens, but was badly hurt in the process, suffering a mauled right arm. As Mary Jane rushed to his side, Cadaverous and his minions closed in on them. His forces overpowered Spider-Man, and while he was helpless to stop it, Cadaverous impaled Mary Jane and threw her off a bridge, killing her. 12 years later, Peter had stopped being Spider-Man. Now working full-time as a reporter, he was constantly on the road, which left him distant from his son. Ben was being raised mostly by Aunt May, and Peter was haunted by the feeling that he was failing both of them. During a brief stop back in New York between flights, Peter got a call from Ben's school principal since Ben had gotten into another fight defending someone from a bully. Peter picked him up and urged him to stop stepping in to help others, worried it would only get him into trouble, which led to an argument between the pair. Ben stormed off, and Peter went to catch his flight. But before boarding, he spoke briefly with May on the phone, and she urged him to be more present for his son. Ben met a girl named Faye in detention, and the two hit it off. That night, he dreamed about his mother, then woke up clinging to the ceiling, a sign his spider powers had switched on. Aunt May, who seemed to have been waiting for this exact moment, helped him down and sent him digging through his father's old things in the attic, where he found the original Spider-Man suit. However, it was Faye who convinced Ben to actually put on the suit and start working as a vigilante. 12 years following the initial attack, Cadaverous returned. To draw Ben out, Cadaverous kidnapped Peter and used him as bait, since the inherited genetic changes running through the Parker bloodline meant he needed blood from both father and son to finish his revival serum. While trying to save his dad, Ben got help from one of Cadaverous's mind-controlled drones who guided him out of the villain's lair. Peter asked the drone who they were, and he got back a single-word response. Tiger, the nickname Mary Jane always called him, meaning MJ was alive after all, turned into one of Cadaverous's brainwashed servants. For the final fight, Tony Stark and Riri Williams suited up as Iron Man and Ironheart to assist Ben in the fight. Mary Jane, while still trapped under Cadaverous's control, broke through it for just long enough to shield Ben, giving him the chance to physically tear out the chip, enslaving her. As the battle collapsed into chaos, an explosion put both Ben and the newly freed Mary Jane in danger, while on the same bridge where she had apparently died 12 years before. Peter then threw himself into the blast's path to save them both. He'd already taken a fatal wound earlier in the fight and wasn't going to make it regardless, but the sacrifice let him die shielding the family he'd spent more than a decade holding at arm's length out of guilt and fear. Sometime later, following the hero's victory, Nick Fury handed Ben and a revived, newly spider-powered Mary Jane suits of their own. Mother and son taking up the mantle Peter had once carried, then abandoned, and finally reclaimed just long enough to save them both. Spider-Ben. On Earth 3145, Ben Parker gained spider powers after being bitten by a radioactive spider while attending a science demonstration with his nephew Peter. Rather than following Peter's suggestion to use his abilities for show business, Ben chose to use his powers to help others as a hero. However, he eventually retired, grief-stricken, after his mortal enemy, the Emerald Elf, the Norman Osborn of this universe, uncovered his secret identity and murdered both May and Peter. Ben was later contacted by Ezekiel Sims, who warned him that Morlun, the multiversal spider totem hunter, was coming to kill him. Having already lost everything, Ben accepted Ezekiel's help and was kept safe in a secret bunker within Sims' tower. He remained there after his Earth was devastated by a thermonuclear war, which was the result of a scheme by Dr. Octopus going terribly wrong. Count Parker. On Earth 25593, Peter Parker attempted to save his dying Uncle Ben by experimenting with the venom of an immortal vampire spider, but the experiment instead turned him into a vampire. He became known as Count Parker and established himself in a mansion on the outskirts of a small town where he spent hundreds of years conducting experiments to create human-animal hybrids. Mary Jane Van Helsing was a skilled vampire hunter who accepted a job to kill Count Parker. She broke through the defenses of his manor with ease and confronted him directly, ultimately gaining the upper hand in their fight. Just as she was about to stake him, she had a vision of herself and Parker as a happy couple across the multiverse. That moment of hesitation gave the Count the opening he needed to bite her and turn her into a vampire. Mary Jane then became his vampiric bride, embracing her new undead existence alongside him and enjoying its pleasures. The Lizard. On Earth 65, Peter Parker grew up as a close childhood friend of Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy before Gwen took on her later identity as the vigilante Spider-Woman. Peter was bullied throughout his youth for being nerdy and awkward, earning the cruel nickname Pathetic Parker from his tormentors, with Gwen frequently stepping in to defend him. This treatment left him increasingly bitter toward his classmates over time. When Spider-Woman first appeared, Peter became a devoted fan of hers, but this only intensified the bullying he faced at school, and he found himself wishing he could have powers of his own like the heroine he admired. Eventually, worn down by the years of mistreatment, he stole a formula developed by Dr. Kurt Connors that had originally been created for a science fair project. Using it, Peter transformed himself into the Lizard, seeking to take revenge on those who had abused him for so long. Peter then transformed into the Lizard at his school's prom after enduring more bullying from his classmates and watching Harry ask Gwen to be his date, which left him fuming with jealousy and embarrassment since he had romantic feelings for Gwen. He went on a rampage through the school, eventually clashing with Spider-Woman in battle. He was killed during the confrontation, transforming back into his human form as he died and telling her that he had only wanted to be special like her. Life Story. On Earth 19529, Spider-Man and other Marvel heroes began their careers at the same time their comics were originally published, with time afterward passing in real time, similar to the real world. A major turning point in this universe was Tony Stark's choice to take a more hands-on role as Iron Man during the Vietnam War. This decision ramped up tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, prolonged the Vietnam War, and eventually sparked a larger World War-level conflict called the Russian War. This war began in 1984 and involved nuclear missiles destroying the town of Allentown, Pennsylvania, while many American superheroes were vanished to Battleworld during the original Secret Wars. The United States ultimately won the Russian War sometime before 1995, though the exact date isn't specified. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, Tony Stark gained significant political power, becoming Secretary of Defense and pushing through the Superhuman Registration Act. This law divided the superhero community, and Doctor Doom took advantage of that division to seize control of the planet. Turning our attention back to 1962, 15-year-old Peter Parker was bitten by the radioactive spider. After his uncle Ben was murdered, Peter finally grasped the lesson that Ben had tried to teach him, that with great power must also come great responsibility. This realization led him to become the crime-fighting superhero Spider-Man. At 19, Peter landed an internship at the Baxter Building under Reed Richards and went on to spend the next decade working alongside Reed and later Otto Octavius at the Future Foundation. After the death of his wife Gwen Stacy, Peter fell in love with and married Mary Jane Watson. She gave birth to the couple's twin children, Claire and Benjamin, while Peter was away participating in the Secret Wars. When he returned to New York wearing a black symbiote suit, Peter was attacked and buried alive by Kraven the Hunter, who wanted to replace him as New York's protector. The symbiote helped Peter dig himself out of the grave, but it also fueled a blinding rage that nearly drove him to kill Kraven. Mary Jane stopped him by firing a sonic gun that separated Peter from the symbiote, but the trauma of the incident led her to leave Peter, taking their children across the country to raise them in Portland. By 1995, Peter felt unfulfilled by his life, finding no satisfaction in being Spider-Man or in his role as CEO of Parker Industries. Still separated from Mary Jane, he began an affair with private investigator Jessica Jones, whom he'd hired to track the recently released from prison Norman Osborn. Otto Octavius then abducted Peter, intending to study both him and his clone Ben to reverse engineer Miles Warren's cloning experiments and possibly find a way to escape his own death. During the analysis, Otto claimed that Peter was actually the clone and Ben was the original, sending Ben into a rage that led him to attack Otto. When Peter tried to hold Ben back, Otto lunged at them with one of his mechanical arms, and as Ben's spider sense led him to dodge the attack, Harry Osborn jumped in front of Peter and was killed protecting him. Afterward, Peter gave Ben his life and company, choosing instead to move to Portland to try to live quietly with his family. Before leaving, he confronted Norman Osborn, who was living in a garage in New Jersey, revealing that he knew Osborn had manipulated the data Otto had used and that Peter had been the original all along. When told of Harry's death, Osborn attacked Peter, but the shock triggered a heart attack and the elderly man died, cursing Peter with his last breath. Peter later returned to New York to attend J. Jonah Jameson's funeral in September of 2001, during which the September 11th terrorist attacks occurred. Wearing Ben's red mask to conceal his identity, Peter did what he could to help. 5 years later, Ben was killed by the vampiric Morlun, an event that indirectly exposed Peter as Spider-Man to the public. Peter initially planned to flee the country to draw Morlun away from his family, but his daughter Claire convinced him to go to New York instead and tell his story to the Daily Bugle. There, Tony Stark, now the United States Secretary of Defense, confronted Peter on the steps of Parker Industries and pressured him to sign the Superhuman Registration Act, subtly threatening to seize his company if he refused. When Parker rejected the offer, Tony's Avengers team, named the US Avengers, attacked him, but Captain America's own team of Avengers intervened. This gave Parker enough time to slip into the building and suit up as Spider-Man. Peter disarmed the US Avengers by triggering a failsafe built into their armor, correctly suspecting Tony had installed it out of distrust for his own team. Peter then fled the scene alongside Captain America's Avengers. 13 years later, in 2019, Peter was one of the last surviving senior heroes, most others having been killed or forced into hiding since the Civil War and Doctor Doom's rise to global power. Because of his age and experience, Peter became the leader of the resistance against Doom's rule. Eventually, Peter and Miles Morales set out on a mission to reach the Doomsday Machine, an orbital space station Stark had left behind as a last resort to shut down Doom's technology worldwide. Aboard the station, the two were attacked by Kraven, now bonded to the symbiote, and Peter soon realized that Miles' mind had actually been taken over by Otto Octavius. Peter and Otto faced off in a final mental confrontation, one that Peter won thanks to the memory of Aunt May. As the space station began to collapse, Peter made Otto promise he would restore Miles' mind and launched an escape pod to safety. Peter then tried to hold the crumbling station together with his webbing long enough for the Doomsday Pulse to activate. When his webbing ran out and the station started tearing apart around him, the symbiote stepped in, holding the station together just long enough for the pulse to fire. Peter, accepting his inevitable fate, closed his eyes moments before the station detonated, his final thoughts turning to Mary Jane. Web of Shadows. Spider-Man Web of Shadows is a 2008 video game where the player chooses whether Spider-Man walks a path of either villainy or heroism. In the universe of the game, Peter Parker had roughly the same origin and powers as the mainline Spider-Man, including a stint bonded to the Venom symbiote. Once he separated from it, the symbiote found its way to a disgraced reporter named Eddie Brock, who held Peter responsible for ruining his career and became Venom. The two clashed a few times before agreeing to a temporary truce, which eventually collapsed years later. The game begins with Spider-Man searching Manhattan for Mary Jane Watson during a citywide symbiote invasion. He found her alongside Luke Cage, but was suddenly ambushed by an unknown assailant. The story then flashes back 4 days to show how the crisis began. There, Spider-Man clashed with Venom, whose symbiote latched onto him and restored his black suit, letting him defeat Venom and drive him off. He then helped Luke Cage defuse a gang war between the Park Avenues and the Rolling Sevens in Harlem, brokering a parlay between the rival leaders, foiling a sniper assassination attempt against them, and uncovering evidence that Kingpin had engineered the whole conflict. In the good outcome, he uses that evidence to end the war peacefully, while in the dark outcome, he lets the gangs kill each other, enraging Luke Cage. On his way to Fisk Tower to confront Kingpin, Spider-Man instead spotted Black Cat fleeing and, with Moon Knight's help, caught and defeated her, learning she had been posing as a double agent against Kingpin to win his affection. In the good outcome, Peter rejects Black Cat and allies with Moon Knight, while in the bad outcome, he accepts her feelings and partners with her instead. He then uncovered Vulture's role overseeing production of Goblin gliders, and after beating him, either webbed him up and swung off or webbed him up and recruited him. Later, while fighting through Kingpin's men, Spider-Man was suddenly attacked by deranged wall-climbing civilians, then confronted in Hell's Kitchen by Wolverine, who attacked him after smelling the symbiote inside him before being convinced Spider-Man had it under control and joining him in a second clash with Venom, who again fled while having it revealed that the wall-climbing civilians had themselves been infected by symbiotes. As the outbreak worsened, Black Widow's SHIELD team arrived and set up quarantine camps across the city. Unable to bring about any scientific help, Spider-Man reluctantly broke the Tinkerer out of Rikers Island with Rhino's assistance so the Tinkerer could build a device that could kill the symbiotes without harming their hosts. Meanwhile, SHIELD destroyed the Manhattan Bridge to contain the spread, and Spider-Man helped secure Kingpin's cooperation and escort civilians to safety. Spider-Man next fought and defeated symbiote Electro, helped defend the SHIELD base at Stark Tower, joined Moon Knight in protecting Spectre Tower, and aided Wolverine with a civilian evacuation, during which Wolverine himself was infected, and Spider-Man then defeated him. Spider-Man was then attacked by a symbiote-infected Black Cat, but with Mary Jane's help he defeated her, though she was left severely injured, and he either hands her to MJ to be nursed back to health, or shares part of his own symbiote with her, which fractures his bond with MJ. Meanwhile, SHIELD installed the Tinkerer's finished device at Trask Industries, only for symbiote Vulture and his Vulturelings to launch an aerial assault. Spider-Man defeated symbiote Vulture and cured him. Following this in the game's dark ending, Spider-Man embraces the full power of the symbiote suit and learns Venom was attacking the SHIELD helicarrier. After a final battle with Venom, Spider-Man forced Venom into the engine himself and escaped alone. After Spider-Man defeated Venom, he took control of the symbiotes as their ruler. In the darkest ending, the symbiote-infected Black Cat joined Spider-Man to help him lead the symbiotes and became his new lover. Apaec. Apaec the Decapitator was a god worshipped by Peru's Moche people from roughly the 1st to 8th centuries AD. He is a monstrous hybrid creature, having a man's upper body joined to a spider's lower body, snakes for hair, long sharp teeth, and a taste for cruelty and bloodletting. Eventually, in the main Marvel universe, he was captured by the US government and locked away in the Special Containment Center, a secret underwater supermax prison built for the world's most dangerous individuals. After losing the siege of Asgard, Norman Osborn was also sent there, where he met Father Kohlmeyer, a secret devotee of Apaec who set the god free. After a brief rampage through the facility, Osborn offered to free everyone present if they helped him escape. In the escape, the group fled the prison by submarine, but the facility exploded and damaged the vessel. Apaec left the sub and sealed it in a web that supplied oxygen, then pushed it to the surface himself. Osborn later turned himself in and was sent to the raft prison, while Apaec went home to the Peruvian jungle. After breaking out of the raft, Osborn began building his Hammer organization and assembling a new team of Dark Avengers. One of the people he brought in was Apaec, and Osborn gave a genetic modification drug to the god to reshape him into a form resembling Spider-Man but with 4 extra arms. As part of this team, Apaec battled the mainstream Avengers and later served under Luke Cage's Thunderbolts-turned-Dark Avengers group once its members were fitted with restraining nanites. Physically, Apaec's spider-like body let him cling to walls and other surfaces, and he could spin organic webbing from his forearms, though unlike Spider-Man, he had no precognitive spider sense, leaving him open to surprise attacks. He could also wrap himself in a bell-shaped web to breathe underwater indefinitely, much like a real-world diving bell spider. As a divine being, he is essentially immortal, immune to disease, and able to heal wounds at superhuman speed, though regrowing fully severed limbs or organs required magical help. Carl King. In the main Marvel universe, Carl King grew up as a bully to Peter Parker. As a kid, he saw Peter get bitten by the spider that gave him his powers, and later saw Peter using those newfound abilities. Wanting powers of his own, Carl tracked down the spider after it had died and ate it. This slowly caused his body to disintegrate into a swarm functioning as a single hive mind. He first realized what had happened to him when he accidentally devoured his own mother from within and then puppeted her remains. Since each person he consumed made him stronger, he went on to kill and absorb his father and his girlfriend as well, working toward becoming powerful enough to defeat Spider-Man. Carl secretly watched Spider-Man for a long time before finally making his move to attack him and try to take over his body and powers. He killed Jess Patton and used her skin as a disguise, then approached Peter, claiming she had just been kicked out by her boyfriend. When he later got the chance to catch Peter alone at his apartment, he knocked him out and tied him to a chair, intending to take his skin next. Before he could, a neighbor came by to ask about the noise, so Carl killed and ate him instead. This gave Peter the time to break free, and a fight broke out between them. During the struggle, Carl accidentally struck a fuse box, and the resulting explosion wiped out most of the spiders making up his body. Only one spider survived, escaping to the street outside, but it was crushed underfoot by a passerby who had no idea what it was, finally killing Carl for good. Brian Kornfield. In the main Marvel universe, Brian Kornfield grew up on Broadway in New York City, raised by his single mother after his father died when he was still young. He grew up admiring the city's superheroes and at one point even wrote a letter trying to reach out to Spider-Man, but everything changed when his mother was attacked in a mugging, leaving him consumed by a desire for revenge and justice. This desire for revenge led him to Dwarf, a servant of the demon Chthon. Dwarf offered him powers modeled after Spider-Man's abilities, and by tapping into the dark magic of the Darkhold, Brian transformed into Spider-X, paying for his new powers with his soul. This gave him superhuman strength, speed, stamina, durability, agility, and reflexes, well beyond what any human could achieve. Like Spider-Man, he could stick to walls, and he had a spider sense so sharp it verged on predicting the future. He could also spin organic webbing mixed with a strong acid. Unlike Spider-Man, Spider-X's transformation gave him extra monstrous traits, such as 4 additional spider-like limbs, fangs that could fire blasts of energy, and venomous acidic saliva. On top of that, he could breathe fire and had a healing factor. With these new abilities, Brian hunted down and killed the man who had attacked his mother. Then, believing his purpose in life was to deliver justice, he began targeting as many criminals as he could. Eventually, Spider-X clashed with the mutant Paralyzer, who had tapped into a power station's electrical energy in an attempt to recreate the being known as Zax. The plan succeeded, and Spider-X found himself facing the reconstituted energy creature directly. In the ensuing battle, several heroes pooled their combined powers against Zax, triggering a massive explosion that destroyed the creature, but also claimed the life of Spider-X. April Parker. On Earth 982, May Parker was the future first child of Peter and Mary Jane Parker. Shortly after her birth, Norman Osborn secretly kidnapped her and had her cloned as part of an experiment called Project Changeling. He kept the clone in a stasis chamber for years, and during that time he altered her genetics, replacing roughly 35% of her DNA with material from a symbiote, making her the first human symbiote hybrid clone. This symbiote material came from fragments of the Venom symbiote, but unlike a true symbiote bond, it had no consciousness of its own, so she never had to share her mind with a second personality. This clone was created as part of Norman Osborn's larger scheme to achieve immortality by transforming into a goblin-like creature. 16 years after her creation, the Goblin Queen discovered her stasis chamber hidden in a secret Oscorp lab. When Peter Parker went to investigate the chamber, he was knocked out by the Goblin Queen, and the clone, now called New May, broke free. New May then started stalking and getting in conflicts with the real May Parker. Over time, it was shown that although the real May wouldn't kill, New May had no such limits. Later, after May was badly hurt in an explosion, New May took the opportunity to step into May's life. However, the real May eventually returned, and after a conflict which brought about the death of Norman Osborn, a truce between May and New May, and legitimate confusion about which one was the real May, May suggested bringing the clone into their family as the sister she'd always wanted. Peter was wary of her, but Mary Jane agreed, and the clone took the name April. She enrolled in May's school under the cover story that they were cousins. The two Spider-Girls soon settled into a shared life as both sisters and partners in crime. But April proved far more rebellious and ruthless than May, often needing May to hold her back. Eventually, April's jealousy of May pushed her to break off on her own as the anti-hero Mayhem, who went on to kill Tombstone and later the Hobgoblin after wrongly believing he'd killed May. Man Mountain Marco also hired her to kill Black Tarantula, a job she nearly finished before Spider-Girl stepped in to stop her. Eventually, being that she was still convinced she was the real May, April tried to force May into giving up being Spider-Girl and confessing that she was the clone, which triggered a fight between the pair. In one possible future, that fight ended with May dying when the warehouse they were battling in exploded, leading to a timeline where clones of the Carnage symbiote took over the world. To prevent that outcome, April from that future timeline traveled back in time and shared her memories with her younger self. Realizing the world needed May more than it needed her, April chose to sacrifice herself to stop that future from happening, letting May live. Before dying, she admitted she truly was the clone and asked May to tell their family how much she loved them. May was devastated by April's death, but Peter reassured her that clones have a strange habit of finding a way to always come back. Blood Spider. On Earth 616, Blood Spider trained alongside Jagged Bow and Death Shield under Taskmaster, who prepared the three of them to copy Spider-Man's fighting style specifically so they could kill him. When Matt Murdock placed a bounty on Daredevil's head to lure out Bullseye, Blood Spider was among the villains who took the bait and tried to collect, only to be beaten with little effort. He met his apparent end when Venom burned him alive, yet he turned up again in stories set later on, leaving it unclear whether the original Blood Spider came back or someone new simply took over the Blood Spider mantle. In combat against Solo and Spider-Man, Blood Spider showed off reflexes and strength well beyond human norms, punching through a wall and dodging Solo's gunfire. Since Taskmaster chose him specifically to master Spider-Man's moves, it's reasonable to assume his physical abilities lined up closely with Spider-Man's, likely covering similar strength, reflexes, and agility, and possibly some form of wall-crawling ability, whether built into his powers or achieved through gear. What other lore videos would you like to see? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to the next video with all of you.